Good afternoon, everyone. We are very, very pleased to welcome back one of the pillars of this lecture series. Hans Angress was born in Berlin in 1928. His family was what he describes as a typical upper middle class German Jewish family. His father was a banker, his mother a homemaker. Hans survived the war in Amsterdam, in hiding for 18 months with the family Kui. His mother Henny and older brother Fred also survived in hiding. His oldest brother, Tom, had emigrated to the US in 1939 and served as an interrogator of prisoners of war in the 82nd Airborne Division. His father Ernst perished in Auschwitz. We have been among the many beneficiaries of Hans's dedication to telling his family story to as broad an audience as possible. Hans has spoken to groups for many years throughout Sonoma County and throughout this country. We all know how valuable and how very important Hans's dedication to preserving this memory is, and now you will be privileged to hear that story as well. We will show a film that we have put together of one of Hans's former presentations, and then you will have the opportunity to ask him questions. Please welcome Hans, who is celebrating in a couple of months his 90th birthday, Mr. Hans Angress.
Hello.
Hello. I was just wondering how your mother was able to find so many people to trust when there was such a big risk in trusting strangers with helping you survive and basically be on the run. How did she make those connections with people and find the people that could help?
You want to use that? Okay. Basically, we knew the people that helped my mother. So it weren't strangers, and we knew that they were okay to be trusted. Don't forget that only about 5% of the Dutch population was not to be trusted. So again, as was stated earlier, 5% was probably actively fighting the Nazis, 5% was helping them, and the rest were the bystanders. But the bystanders, I think most of us are bystanders in life. I mean, in order not to be a bystander, you have to be a hero, and how many of us are heroes?
Hello. In the lecture, you mentioned 5 sort of specific things that are required to hide successfully. You know, knowing what's going on, willing to go into hiding, having the means, and the people who are willing to hide you, and then a little bit of luck. Would you say that's a sort of, could that be applied to most instances of evasion, or because I know that you said that Nazi behavior was different in West Europe than it was in East Europe, so would you say that that's a good sort of formula, or were there different circumstances in other places?
The basics are about the same, but there were different circumstances that you had to face. But like I say, the basics of the person dealing with it are the same.
First of all, thank you, Hans. For so long. It's been important and valuable. The question So the question I have is, there was a resolution that represented the world's point of view that was held in the simple phrase, never again. And of course, that's something that's proven to be inaccurate these days. And because there's been prejudice, in particular against the Jewish people for thousands and thousands of years, and understanding that social justice movements take time for them to take hold, do you visualize, at least in your heart and in your imagination, that one day this will change? Do you think maybe in 25 or 50 years there'll be some change? I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
I'm afraid I'm not too optimistic about that. I think the human condition itself doesn't change much. And so the hope that one day we will all love and trust each other, I think is an illusion. I wished I could be more positive, but quite frankly, I'm not.
I was just curious, how were you able to stay in contact with your ex-girlfriend?
You mean during the war, after the war, or what? Well, we did lose contact during the war, and after the war, I went to her house, and she was still living there. So that was simple enough. And unfortunately, she just recently passed away.
Hi, Hans. As a second-generation Holocaust survivor myself, my family came from Greece. The family was worried about my father, who at that time was only 19 years old, because they had heard that young Jewish healthy men were being sent off to labor. No one suspected that anything would happen to the rest of us. How did your mother know that those Jews who were transported away were sent to their deaths? Because they were told they were going to be resettled. And you guys took a huge risk being hidden.
My mother basically knew the Germans very well. And she had no illusions that the German Nazis would do anything favorable to Jewish people. And she was, I was very fortunate to have her. I mean, like I said earlier, my mother was not a warm, fuzzy mother, but I'm lucky to have had her, because otherwise I might not have made it.
Oh, are you on? Okay. You gave us the percentages of the people who were Nazi in Holland or Amsterdam, maybe. Were you ever told or found out about the Danish people that when the Nazis made the Jewish wear the yellow star? Many Danish, thousands and thousands of Danish people in Copenhagen, and one of the king's people wore the star and rode their bicycles down the main street, clanging and jamming up traffic. Because the Danish were smuggling thousands and thousands of Jewish people across the border. Once they got into Denmark, they spread them out into the country and put them on fishing boats to get them over to Sweden. Was any of that news ever relayed over to the people in the underground?
The Danes had 7,000 Jews, and Holland had 160,000. That's a big difference. And so the German efforts also were concentrated where the most Jews were. There was no point in getting the Danish people upset about the relatively few Jews that lived there. So I think that the German effort in Denmark was considerably less than in Holland.
As admirable as the Danes may appear, they never were required to wear the yellow star. That was a rumor that was started by the British to encourage the Danes to resist the Germans. So the yellow star was never introduced in Denmark. The Germans were very benevolent towards the Danes. They had actually gotten, one might say, addicted to Danish butter and ham. The Danes actually worked for the Germans. I mean, the remarkable thing about the Danish rescue is the way the people actually performed the rescue. But you could not ever compare Amsterdam to Copenhagen. They were like night and day, just as you couldn't compare Amsterdam with Warsaw, perhaps. Yes, it's a legend. Because we can't figure out, or we don't have enough sense to figure out how the Danes were able to have such solidarity with everyone in their country that they saw it as their responsibility to save the Jews, not necessarily as some courageous act.
Hello. Out of the many things we probably take for granted, what was the thing you missed most or impacted you the most while you were in hiding? I imagine it's the little things at the end that got to you, like losing track of time or attending holidays. What was the thing you least expected as a kid to get to you?
My hiding experience was actually a very positive experience because the family Kui was heavily involved in all kinds of activity against the Nazis. And so living in that environment was for me basically a high. Once I was in hiding, for me the worst was over. And also being surrounded by all the activity against the Nazis was refreshing for me at the time.
Hans, you talked about leaving for the United States after the war and your mother remaining in Holland. Was there a point at which your family was reunited with her?
No, my mother went to London and remarried. And so we visited with her, but we were never really reunited as a family. My brother and I went to the United States. She went to England and married. We married and we visited each other. She sometimes came over here, and we also visited her in London at one time.
Hello. You mentioned that you had a lot of anger after you came to the United States, and did you say that you had a lot of anger? No? And that you channeled your anger to do productive things? Did I misunderstand that?
The anger had nothing to do with the United States. I mean, I was basically angry against the Nazis.
Hi. I'm wondering about that moment with the Cub Scout leader. I'm wondering if you ever followed up with that person after the war. And I'm also wondering why you think that person did not report you when they very well could have. Have you thought about that, or have you talked to that person since?
Actually, I did visit after the war, and we chatted some. I didn't push the fact that she had been a Nazi during the war, but I wanted to re-establish contact, and which we did. And we talked about the past. And quite frankly, if you had a personal relationship with a person, I really was not too much worried that she would turn me in. I mean, we had a really good relationship while I was a Cub Scout and she was a leader. And I had the feeling that she wouldn't turn me in, and she didn't. I mean, and she couldn't have anyhow because I didn't allow her to follow me.
I just wanted to say one thing. I'm Hans's daughter, and when he answered the question about optimism, and his response was that he doesn't. He conveyed a somewhat less optimistic view, then he brought us. I want you to know that he passed a tremendous amount of optimism on to his 6 children, and in the list that he made of stay informed, don't take democracy for granted, do what you can to be good and to contribute. He passed that on to us. Many of us have been teachers, have passed that on, and I'm hoping that and I believe that today that optimism is again being passed on of do what you can, help keep this world strong and wholesome and good for everybody. He definitely passed that on to us.
Thank you, Mel.
You ended the presentation by asking everyone to think about what they would do in those circumstances. And a couple of times you referenced that those very, what I think are interesting statistics or percentages about, in a situation like this, about 5% of us become collaborators, about 5% of us become open resistors, and about 90% become bystanders. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what incentivizes a person in an extraordinary circumstance like this to choose one of these paths or another. What kind of observations did you make about how people made these decisions for themselves? Do you think they chose these things out of fear? Did they make their decisions out of fear? Did they make their decisions out of some sort of financial motivation, or was it ideology, or some combination of all of these? I'm very curious about what is the potential for all of us in this room to be the resistor in that circumstance.
Well, I don't really know. In order to be a resistor, you have to be somewhat of a hero. And how many of us are heroes? My guess is 5%. It might be 3%. It might be 8%. I don't know. But most of us are not heroes as such. And often bystanders are frowned upon. I don't. I think most of us are bystanders in a way. We're trying to make the best of what we are presented with. And then there are a few that are the negative ones that causing all the problems. Well, basically, Israel has an organization called Yad Vashem who honors people who have been helping the Jews during that period. And I recommended them, and as a matter of fact, it was not very easy to get Israel to do it. I had to have the help of Barbara Boxer to finally convince Israel to award the Kois for their actions. And the Kois basically said, we did just what a decent human being does. They didn't consider themselves heroes, or they just considered themselves decent human beings.
Kois religious?
they were convinced socialists. And in this country, socialists are sort of frowned upon, in Europe not. It's just one of the political groups. But they had very strong very strong social conscience in every respect.